You know, every pond has its own ruler. Today, we're diving into the story of one of them, a big fish in a small pond. And we're going to see what happens when she finds out her world is, well, a whole lot bigger than she thought.
So yeah, our story kicks off with a character who's pretty sure she's at the very top of the food chain. But in the world of ponds, big is really all about perspective, isn't it? All right, let's set the scene. Welcome to the small pond. Thing is, it wasn't actually all that small. It only got that name because right over a beaver dam there was a much bigger pond. And in the small pond, a bigmouth bass named Netty ruled the roost. In her world, she wasn't just a big deal, she was the only deal. And she absolutely loved it. I mean, why wouldn't she? Being the biggest fish meant she answered to nobody. Even better, everybody else had to answer to her. It was a power she enjoyed. Maybe a little too much. Yeah, her rule was absolute. Take Sunny, for example. All Netty had to say was, "I'm hungry," and boom, that was a command to go get her some bugs. And Sunny, even though he'd grumble about it, always did it. She was especially cruel to a little fish named Guppy. I mean, she would just tease him without mercy, calling him baitfish and singing these nasty little songs. For Netty, it was just business as usual. But for the other fish, well, they were starting to get pretty fed up. And then one day, it finally happened. It all just boiled over. Perch, who was probably the bravest of the smaller fish, swam right up to Netty and called her out. Netty's defense was, a classic. "I can't help it. I'm a bigmouth bass. It's just how I am." But Perch wasn't having any of it. He threw down a dare. "If you're so big and tough, why don't you go play with the other big fish and just leave us alone?" And that challenge just kicked off this rapid-fire argument. Perch pushed, Sunny jumped in, and Netty, feeling totally cornered, just dug in her fins. Fine, she'd leave for the big pond. Clearly, they just couldn't handle her greatness. So she swam off toward that beaver dam. And with every single flick of her tail, she got more and more excited. She told herself she didn't need them anyway. She was a big fish. She was destined for bigger waters. And that feeling just bubbled up until it burst out into a song. Oh yeah, her song was all about her confidence. She sang about being the strongest, the fastest, how she'd totally outgrown her home and was ready for the big time. She was a big fish, and the whole world was about to find out. And so she started picking up speed, heading right for the dam. With one powerful flick of her mighty tail, she launched herself right out of the water, just soaring through the bright sunny air, and landed with a huge splash in the big pond. But her grand entrance didn't quite go as she'd planned. Almost instantly, bam, she's shoved aside by this burly shadfish who didn't even seem to see her. She cried out, but the shadfish just kept on swimming. Not exactly the welcome she'd been hoping for. And it didn't get any better. She spotted another bigmouth bass, one even bigger than her, and tried to, start a conversation. But he just dismissed her with a single word, shrimp, and pushed her right out of his way. Then came the ultimate humiliation. A massive northern pike, the biggest fish she had ever seen, just laughed at her. "You the big fish?" he sneered, before calling her a little baitfish. Yep, the exact same insult she loved to use on Guppy. And in that moment, as that huge pike swam away, everything just changed. After being pushed around and insulted, Netty, for the very first time in her life, felt truly small. She was completely heartbroken. She swam all the way back to the beaver dam. All she wanted was to go home, back to Guppy and Sunny and Perch. But the weight of her own meanness, her own words, it made her too ashamed to even try. As she stared at that barrier between the two worlds, a whole different song came out. This one was quiet, and it was full of regret. She sang about being a little fish in a big pond, and she admitted for the first time that she'd been mean to her friends, just because she could be. She sang about how much she wished she could go back to apologize for everything. And just as she sang those words, a small voice came from a hole in the dam. It was Perch. He had heard everything. Netty swam over, her voice all quiet. "I meant every word." Then Sunny appeared, and you could still hear a little bit of hurt in his voice. "You weren't very nice to us." Netty didn't argue.
She didn't make excuses. She just looked at her friends and said, "I know. I've learned my lesson. I'm sorry."
And then, through a third hole, came the voice of Guppy. And he wasn't afraid anymore. He just smiled and asked her to come home. Overjoyed, Netty made a brand new promise, right there and then. A big fish shouldn't be a bully. A big fish should look out for the little ones. From now on, she was taking all 3 of them under her fin. And you know what? She kept her word. Her journey to the big pond had changed her completely. She was still the biggest fish in her home. But now, she was also the kindest. She had taken this massive leap to find a bigger world, and in doing that, she found something much, much more important, a bigger heart.